Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be moderating this session today. We have an amazing set of women. This is an incredible panel. The bios are in the app and you all know who I am. So I'm going to keep our intros short so that we can move on to the conversation, in which I know we're not going to have enough time. In the interest of time, I'll just introduce Patricia Eng, who's President and CEO of Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders in Philanthropy, affectionately known as APIP. Storm Gray, Executive Director of Emerging Practitioners in Philanthropy, known as EPIP. And my dear friend, Lori Villarosa, Founder and Executive Director of Philanthropic Initiative for Racial Equity, for PRI. We have lots of questions, and I have a chat right here. I'm going to learn this moderating by Zoom thing. So if I'm looking away, it's because I'm looking for your questions. We have some questions that we're going to start off with, but you can start putting them through and we will ask them. And we'll go from there. So thank you. And thank you for joining us at HIP today at a very important time in our country. So I first want to start by asking our fabulous ladies to share a little bit about themselves so we can know their stories. After all, this session is called Herstory. So tell us, what is her story, your story? And also, if you could weave in there a little bit about what's happening in the country, how in the world, and how you're processing. For me, I was sharing earlier, for me, there's so many contradictions in this moment in time. How are you feeling about it? Lori, why don't we start with you?
Great. Hello, good afternoon or good evening, everyone. I'm, as Ana Marie said, I'm Lori Villarosa with PRI, and you know, there's so many feelings and so many issues to process. For those of you who know PRI, our focus is explicitly on advancing issues of structural racism. And for myself, I actually have been in the field of philanthropy, working at the intersections of racial justice and philanthropy since 1991, consistently on this focus. And I actually started at a national foundation at an era after, before the LA uprising. So experience going through the LA uprising and rebellion, and knowing how much that actually ushered in one of the core stages of foundation's approaches to moving from more of a charitable, how can we support work for communities of color, to thinking about how can we address race relations and how can we address institutional racism, and then moving through the experience with Katrina, where there was more shift to addressing structural racism, and then Ferguson, where there was more awareness of Black-led organizing and the importance there, and then the moment that we're at now, which is both building on so much of what's been there, and it's so different in so many ways because the level of danger, the level of immediacy on all the fronts that are obviously impacting Black communities, and has long been impacting Black communities and other communities of color, but that are also showing us how racism is used to really advance authoritarianism in scary ways that we need to address. And so I know we don't have time for more than that, and just move on to more of our discussion, but I just want to say that the grounding for me today is trying to hold all of those things, and appreciate the opportunity to be with folks here.
Thank you for sharing, Lori. This is a conversation, so we can all shoot in. Storm, Pat, who would like to go?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Storm Gray. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the Executive Director of EPIP. Today is really challenging. So I would say in a moment of vulnerability, it's been a very difficult day for me today. Oftentimes, you know, we talk about intersectionality and how the different systems of oppression impact us from multiple angles. And I definitely have felt my multiple identities, specifically my Black identity, at the forefront of everything that is happening today. So how am I doing? I'm hurt, I'm angry, I'm challenged with finding hope. I feel a sense of urgency, but also a pull from my ancestors to remind me that the journey to freedom is long and hard fought. And so it is my responsibility to carry the torch, but I'm also heartbroken for the lives that have been lost, for the narratives that have been spun continuously to dehumanize Black and brown bodies, for the grief and the restlessness that I know that people feel, and the desire to be heard, to be seen, to be understood, and not just in times of panic or trauma or distress, but to be heard and understood and validated, even in the smaller microaggressions that happen on a day-to-day basis. So I'm sitting with all of that right now, and it's a very complicated space to be, particularly, you know, as a Black woman, but then also as the leader of EPIP. You know, we are a national organization, and it is striking to me, even thinking about our mission. Our mission is to empower emerging leaders to build a more just and equitable world through philanthropy. And it feels like today, or the past couple of days, we're failing on that mission. And I would say not through any lack of effort on the part of our members or on the organization, but really just a reminder. These past couple of days have been the power of hatred and the power and swiftness of systems of oppression against people of color, Black folks specifically in this country. So it's a lot to sit with, but I am glad to be here with you all today, because I think if there's anywhere that I would be today, if there's any conversation that I would want to be a part of, it is a conversation like the one that we're about to have right now.
Thank you, Storm. Thank you for saying that. Likewise over here, having the three sisters with me. Thank you. Pat.
Yeah, well, thank you, Anna Marie and HIP for having me, and thank you to Lori and Storm. I am glad to be in community with all of you. My name is Pat Eng. I am the president of APIP. I use she, her pronouns. And for me, I always like to start with the personal, right? You know, it's who I am and what brings me to this work. I'll say that I grew up I'm the youngest of 5 girls in a traditional Chinese family, and my parents, I always say that I was their last hope for a boy, right? You know, I was darker than my sisters and everybody else in the neighborhood. It was predominantly Italian neighborhood. I grew up in a very working class family and went to a school where there were lots of other folks from different neighborhoods and very new to me, you know, a lot wealthier than I, right? And so for me, throughout my life, I have been other, and it's taught me, you know, to work for the humanity of all people.
Thank you. I heard, Storm, you talked a lot about power. You said empowering emerging leaders. You said even power of hatred. Tell me how you define power. First part of the question, but also, when do you feel most powerful in your work? And I mean, knowing you, I would say always, because you're just a force of nature. But when do you feel powerful in your work?
Okay. So I guess my answer for both questions is very related. I think of power as deeply personal. I believe that the individual is very powerful. And so when I feel the most powerful is when I feel as though I am being my most authentic self, when I feel unfiltered, just free to just be who it is that I am. And who it is that I am tends to be grounded in a space of love. That's when I feel the most powerful. And when I think about power, I definitely think it is a deeply personal feeling. I think everyone is inherently powerful. I think that when we talk about power, oftentimes in conversations, it's along this binary: who has it, who doesn't, how much do they have, how much don't they have. But I think that is a false start. I think that all of us are powerful, and part of the reason, you know, that we get trapped into that is because we believe others when they tell us who we are and who we are not. And so I feel most powerful when I reclaim who it is that I am, when I reclaim my history. Pat, I love what you shared about your upbringing. You know, I'm from Camden, New Jersey. I, you know, grew up in the projects. I, you know, was, you know, one of the early folks in my family to go to college. And I'm sitting at the helm of a national organization right now. And I think about that, and I think about my lineage. My ancestors were powerful. So I am just a reflection of who they were. And so when I think about that, I think that we are all inherently powerful. It's really up to us to determine what it is that we want to do with the power that we have within us, and not to cede that power to other people and to systems, even systems. I mean, you know, what has given me hope and what has also made me touched me very deeply in the past couple of days is seeing the number of folks that took to the street to own their personal power, to lift up their voices and say, no, this is enough. We are tired, we are hurt. To see, you know, white allies at the front lines in some of these demonstrations, holding a line, literally putting their bodies on the line so that Black and brown folks don't have to do so, because we do that every day. That is taking ownership of your power, your personal power, to go up against, you know, systemic power. And I think that is at the heart of, I think, any liberative movement. It really starts with the people. You know, we can't be as a collective unless we kind of own who we are as an individual. So that's, you know, my attempt of sharing what I think power is and what that means to me.
I'll jump in there too. I feel like, you know, I feel most powerful when I can speak my own truth, and to be comfortable in my own skin, right? You know, but I also feel like you, really owning and recognizing and valuing what has come, who has come before me, and standing in their power. And I know that I stand on their shoulders, and I really work to, oh, it has been a really hard day and a hard week.
There's this graffiti artist out of New Orleans, B. Mike. I think some of you might have been there and seen him. It's so powerful, his work. But what you guys are talking about, what you're saying, reminds me of, I got it from my daughter, and I have one for myself, which says, I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. Have you seen that? And it's just so beautiful. The power that we have and the power as we exercise it. Lori, sometimes what happens when no one's listening, when we feel like we have this authentic power, but no one's listening? That's a surprise question, but that really also is one that worries me. And right now we have listening, but sometimes there's this drumbeat, right? You were in LA, there was a lot of power after the riots in LA, but then people stopped listening. How do you use your power, and what do you think, how would you define it?
Well, you know, it's interesting because my entire career has been, well, not my entire career, but for almost 3 decades has been in philanthropy, where there's this mix of how do we use our power, but how do we focus our power on supporting community activists and organizers or grantees or partners. And then even now when I'm on more in an intermediary space, my board, PRE's board, is all racial justice leaders and activists. And then my own racial identity, I'm a Filipina, I'm biracial, Filipina and white, and while I have my my own life experience is a mix of a family that's 1/3 Black, 1/3 Filipino, 1/3 white, and I have a whole range of what I bring. I'm also very mindful of the privilege that, that I embody, but then you throw in as a woman from a gender perspective, like at what point do I step up versus maybe our tendencies to not step up. And so how do you navigate all those things? And I would say it's not clear, it's not easy. And I think that part of the power is really understanding, though, how power works, really claiming your power when it is critical, when it is risk-taking for yourself, when it is courageous, and at the same time, when it's with humility and when it's with its understanding of whose voices need to be amplified. And so, mindful again that we're in the context of philanthropy, I think that is a really complex issue and that we need to grapple with. And I'm going to be sending some links to folks to share because I know we don't have a lot of time, but there are resources for funders to think about this, about how you navigate power, how you utilize power. NCRP has done things, PRE's done things, and others. Then I also want to say, when I feel most powerful, to your point about the words that I use, it's a mix. Sometimes it is when I'm speaking up, and it is sometimes when I'm standing back. And I think that there's a power in knowing that you aren't the one who needs to take up that space in that moment. So it's a complex mix.
There's a huge power when you know that you have an echo chamber and a community that's holding you up and hugging you and is there to support you. I feel that now in what we have. All of us are part of the change group of folks that are working. And if you go to one of the Change Unity Summits, you feel incredible power in the echoing there. I want to talk also about power in philanthropy and how in your lives, in your story, other women have helped build a pipeline and helped you as you come into philanthropy. Some of you have talked about how we have certain privileges. I definitely have had a lot of privilege as a Latina. I was able to work at National Council of La Raza, it's now Unidos, where the women on that board took me and said, you're not going to be a statistic, we will help you. And they pushed me forward because that wasn't supposed to happen. But how have you seen in your life your movement forward, and how are you building a pipeline for more women of color to have real power in this sector?
I can tackle that. So I would say that how have other women paved the way for me over the course of my career? So I started my career in philanthropy, straight out of college, actually, not even realizing what philanthropy was, just knowing that I wanted to work at a nonprofit because I was volunteering at a nonprofit and I wanted to do something that had meaning. And I would say the first woman that started me along that path was the volunteer coordinator at a nonprofit organization that I was working with. And she just told me to find idealists. And then I found my first job at a foundation. And then my grants manager there, when she left, she taught me, before she left that foundation, taught me how to advocate for myself, navigating the sector. She's an Asian woman. And so, woman of color to woman of color, she said, if you want to make it in this sector, you really have to advocate for yourself. And here's how you begin to navigate the puzzle that is philanthropy. And I would say over the years, I've been fortunate to come across many wonderful women, like the ones that are on this call right now, who have instilled wisdom and have emboldened me to use my voice. And what we strive to do at EPIP is to provide our members with a platform to have their voices heard. It's hard being an emerging practitioner or a young professional in the sector, in a sector like philanthropy, which puts such high priority on traditional top-down hierarchies and professionalism that is grounded in white dominant culture as a part of advancement within the sector. And one of the things that I'm very fortunate for is having EPIP as my own community as a former member myself, but now leading it, trying to support others who are coming through and coming into the sector, figure out how to navigate this sector without losing that personal touch that is uniquely yours. Or as I sometimes say to my staff, how to be in philanthropy without losing your soul. You know, how do you do this work without conforming and fitting yourself into a box? It is hard, is what I will say. And there have definitely been times when I've had to pay the price for it. But I think that what we're trying to do in philanthropy is to help funders realize that the resources that they have, one, aren't inherently theirs, because most of it was gotten from extracted labor from Black and Brown communities. So there's a group of us that believe that philanthropy could be utilized as a means for reparations for communities of color, or others who may want to liberate capital, realizing and recognizing that communities that are closest to the problem are usually closest to the solutions, because they already know what it is that they need. And what we need others and allies to do is to kind of lift some of those restrictions. And a part of that can mean infusing communities with capital, putting communities on grant-making boards, getting folks in front of policymakers, and really pounding through the message that the community needs to be heard and the time is now for that. But I'm rambling. But what I will say is it's really through the women that I've met in my career. And honestly, the women in my family. That is my driving force. That's why I get up every single day. I have, and it's funny because where I'm sitting, I can see it. I have my ancestors, pictures of them, the ones that I know at least, right? On an altar in my living room, and every day is the start of my day. I go and I speak to them, and I tell them, I hope I'm making you proud. So much of my work that I do for my grandmother. And she's not here physically on earth, but I know she's here with me. And it is for her that my life is dedicated to. It is for her that I do the work that I do, because I believe that we are inherently powerful. And a lot of the times you talk about pipelines as though leaders don't exist when we're already here, right? It is the way in which we are thinking about leadership and what a leader looks like, sounds like, acts like, that actually needs to be adjusted, not the people that we want to conform into this picture perfect way of leadership. So if nothing else, that is kind of how I think about developing a pipeline. It is quite literally bucking the system and showing up as my authentic self and making ways and making way for others, like our members, to come through and do the same, and supporting their brilliance and supporting their passion and supporting their ideas, because sometimes we don't always get that same support within our home institutions.
Thank you. I'm really excited that you mentioned your ancestors. I have my mom here that's watching. My grandparents are here. I'm surrounding myself with my ancestors. I always wear their jewelry just so that it's like my shield. Our ancestors definitely are why we do this work. Lori, Pat, either of you want to take this one on?
I'll just jump in really quickly. And first of all, know I don't need to apologize for, but it is such a tough moment. I would say that philanthropy, I agree with you 100%, Storm, around, the sense that like when we in philanthropy, sometimes that there are internship programs and fellowship programs and this kind of thing. And it's like a nice way to say, here, let's have one or two folks, that come into our space. And I always think that it actually should be, I always think of mentorship as two ways. I always think that we have so much to learn, whatever position that we're in. And so I always feel like, the folks who come in, they bring their own expertise, and we really need to honor that. They bring the lived expertise, and they bring an account, like I think that they are great in trying to hold philanthropy accountable in different ways. They bring a level of expertise that I think within philanthropy is not there. And so I think that that's a way to really think, about changing how we think about who has expertise and ultimately who has that power?
Yeah, I would jump in that for me, my mentors were so clearly Black women, both out in community, and that I was so fortunate enough to be in relationship through the portfolio that I was able to build when I was at Mott. And then my mentors were my folks within philanthropy, Black women who were all older. I was in my early 20s when I started in philanthropy. And it was a fascinating mix because the folks who I came up with were incredibly powerful, strong women, but they were a bit of the generation that it was a little bit bifurcated, actually. So it was a little bit of the respectability politics on one hand, because when you think about who was actually in philanthropy in the early 90s when I came in and who was able to rise to the top. And then on the community side, because my focus was community organizing, racial justice, you know, I had folks who were like diehard organizers where just the idea of like, you know, having a newsletter was just like selling out to the man, you know, because this was kind of really raw attention. And the thing though that was lucky for me was in both cases though, they didn't take any shit and they didn't take any of my shrinking myself. So even while on one hand there was the how do you have the humility of recognizing your role in philanthropy, there was also the, you know, that's not the time to play this stuff in terms of like, yes, keep your role in terms of philanthropy in check, but you're there now, you have a power to now be accountable to us to push things in a different way. And that's what I was trying to say earlier about making sure that you're taking your risk that you have and not risking for somebody else. And I think throughout my entire career, that accountability measure has been what's kept me grounded. And then from the intergenerational piece, I am so fortunate to continually be in relationship with younger leaders who are pushing me in the same way. And we've got some amazing younger women on my board right now who are some of the top leaders in the movement right now: Ashley Woodard Henderson, Tamika McCarris, and some of the voices that, you know, really trying to lift up right now. And so I'm grateful for that multi-generational mix as well. And I saw the flash, and I just want to say one thing in case you don't ask it, Anna Marie. You were going to ask about what would you tell your younger self? And I usually hate that question, but because I'm thinking about it.
That's the next question. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'll just say it really quickly and move on to this. But I would tell my younger self, and I would tell women of color out there now, write more, write your story, get it out, write it. I think we have seen in recent years some wonderful pieces that have come out by a number of men in philanthropy that are saying, you know, the right things. It's not that the messages are wrong, but there's messages that are elevating expertise because it's been written when there is so much expertise in the actual practice that countless women of color in philanthropy have been leading. And I know in our own work, it's so much harder for me to get the women of color who are writing for me to go ahead and use their own authority in what they're writing. They you know, when I've done pieces with our critical issues forums, men will just go ahead and like give their opinion and feel comfortable with saying it. And the women will come back and they're going to have like 20 cites and, you know, qualifiers. And I'm like, no, you're the expert. I really you are enough. That's what I want. So I would encourage myself, my past self and others to write more.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I need to say that the chat is going off the charts. I haven't seen this all day long today. So many notes saying thank you for bringing your true, authentic selves to the table, expressing gratitude, and that you're such inspirational leaders. I wanted to share that. So thank you very much for that. And then your younger self. Who else wants to?
I'll go next. I would say to be more creative, right? You know, I think that we too often we try to go outside of the box. We know that we have to get to a different place, but I think that there's so much that we come up against all the time that it's really hard to break out of that box. So I think, you know, it's being creative understanding that the building and valuing of relationships that deepen over time, not superficial networking. I didn't understand what networking was, back then. But I also think that, in the past couple of days, weeks, I've been thinking about resetting this frame of reference. We keep talking about how the standard bearer, is a white male of whatever it is, and anything. And I think that instead of a frame of reference, I've been thinking about a frame of reverence, right? That is working from a place of deep respect that came before you in your community for everyone you meet, for humanity. That is, I think, the frame of reverence that I'd like to really center myself in, and really flipping that frame. I think, that people of color, particularly women, inclusive of trans women, they're gifts, right, that define the heart of this country. We define the heart of this country. We are at the core of what sustains and what is best about this country. And we do that every day without recognition. And I think that even now, women of color bring to the table, it's seen as soft stuff, but it's often the human element that sometimes is missing, even in a sector whose definition is the love of humanity.
No one's talked about this quest for perfectionism, which is the one I would probably mention if I was being asked, that you don't have, my mom's laughing, that you don't have to be perfect, that you can just try it, that you can just do it. You don't have to laugh so much, Mom. Okay, Storm, what about you?
If I were to go back in time and talk to my younger self, I would tell her, especially about navigating philanthropy, you are enough. What you know, so trust your gut and your intuition. And what you don't know, you will find out along the way, and that is okay. Perfection, like Anne-Marie, like you were saying, perfection is not the goal. To be liberated is the goal, which means as you navigate this sector, there are going to be times when even your identity is being called into question. Your intelligence is being called into question. Your ability to analyze or to be a professional or a team player are going to be called into question. People will gaslight you. People will overlook you. People will steal your work and call it their own. But you are still valuable. You are enough, and you are here for a purpose that is greater than anything that you can imagine. So do not let others detract you from that purpose, and utilize your place within this sector to make the best possible difference you can, and agitate always.
I love it. Thank you. Can you guys say a bit about your approach as to how you work with allies? This one's coming from the audience. A little bit about how you've been working with allies.
Yeah. Am I on? Because I would love to address, and I appreciated all of the comments when I finally got on the chat there. One of my, I mentioned the strong Black women, both older and younger, who've been my allies. I mean, been my coaches, been my mentors. I've also had really deep relationships with a number of white women in philanthropy and some in the field. And I would say that one of the most important things and one of the key dynamics is making sure that you've got folks of color who will be perfectly honest with you, who will give you the gift of really concrete feedback, and who will give you the security of letting you stumble. And I know that's tricky because there's also the messages about, like, don't put all of this emotional labor on other people, and yes to all that. Be mindful of all those things. Don't think you could just call somebody up and ask, like, will you be this person for me? But developing authentic relationships is so important, and being willing to take risks, but being willing to hear when you've made mistakes and not making it, so uncomfortable for them to share it and recognize it for the gift that it is.
Anybody else want to tackle this one?
Well, I would just say that this this moment, this pandemic moment, I think everyone knows, you know, that there was so much at the very beginning, anti-Asian sentiment everywhere, you know, and we certainly felt this allyship across the board from everybody. And we certainly in the Asian AAPI community want to be the best allies. I know that historically the community at different points hasn't always been the best allies, right? You know, that there has been tension across you know, APIs and with Black communities over different, you know, over different periods. I think that that's something that we at APIP really struggle with, and really wanting to be sure that we can actually really hold our own communities accountable in this moment to get to a different place. Yeah, to get to a different place so that we are all, you know, I think of shared destiny, you know, it is for me the sense that we all have the shared destiny, and it is for me the most powerful thing, and we have to actually get past and really, you know, as Lori was saying, really dig into in a really vibrant way, but with love and respect to get to a different place.
Great. We have only 5 more minutes and we have 2 audience questions. So I'm going to put them out there and you guys pick which one you prefer or answer them both. But one is very important because this is the week when probably the Supreme Court will be announcing the future of our colleagues with DACA. And this one is talking about how are we more inclusive of our undocumented colleagues. There's many examples of philanthropy not being inclusive. For example, you give someone a fellowship, but then you require them to travel. How, you know, and so it's a conflict there. The other question that I'm getting is, what have been your biggest challenges or opportunities as women of color in philanthropy, and would you mind sharing?
So I will very quickly, because I hear you that we've only got 5 minutes left. So I think that the question about how do we support undocumented folks during this time actually makes me think of what I would have shared to the ally question is, there are times when I realize, even as an ally for others, where my blind spots are. And sometimes, unfortunately, those blind spots only become apparent in times of need or crisis, right? So that question, right, like, we have all these great fellowships, and yet you hire an undocumented person and you ask and expect them to travel. I think that's a great example of how a blind spot is elevated, and to me, a simple addressing of that should and could be to simply reduce whatever the travel restrictions are upon that person. And I know that doesn't nearly speak to what we're facing right now with the Supreme Court and the decision that's coming down the pipeline right now. But I guess right now, where my heart and where my mind really sits is with the question of how do we respond to the things that we don't know when they are put before us. And I don't have an answer for that right now. But perhaps, I don't know, Lori, you may have some guidance, because I find, or at least for myself, to be completely honest, there are times where I still feel like I am learning and growing and expanding, you know?
Yeah,
We're always learning and growing and expanding if we're doing a good job.
Right.
Pat, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say that we all, you know, are, and thank you for that. I mean, we certainly all have our blind spots, and this is where I say that no matter, and I probably am the oldest of anyone here in this call, and yet I feel like I have every day, I learn so much, you know, from folks, and to be, you know, one of the things is to be vulnerable and to really be honest and true about what we don't know. So, and that's where that learning, you know, edge is, but always to be, you know, intentional and really being sure that we are in community with one another, and to hear one another with respect. That weak answer, but heartfelt.
And I wanted to answer I think the question was about some difficult time, and I saw Christelle also had a question in the chat about what do you do when you're being told not to speak up, or I've lost the exact question, but for me, those conflated, because in my first part of my 12 years in philanthropy, I was at a foundation where there was not openness to moving this work at all. I mean, it was a long, hard slog. It was in the 90s. It was not, the conversations were nothing like where they are now. And I was a bit of a fighter, so I was constantly in this like on the edge piece, but I also knew that it was my responsibility to stay in there and fight. And it was definitely my responsibility to take whatever hits versus my grantees taking the hits. It was very clear cut, but then it was also my responsibility to leave when we got to a moment where my integrity as a program officer was going to be jeopardized. We'd been moving like 24 million, got this portfolio that named institutional racism, a lot of progress. And it was actually shortly after 9/11 when there was a pullback and there was a bit of a crisis that I wanted to share, because in this moment of COVID, there was a bit of a, last hired, first fired piece with program areas that were making people uncomfortable. When we had an economic downturn, it was an easy time to gut some of those. And then we had other crises in the country. And I actually, had one of the leaders of the foundation defend the Japanese internment to me. And it was a moment where it was clear, and I actually had the sanctioning of my grantees, who ended up becoming PRE's board, to say this is when I have to leave. If I stay in this moment, I will have basically sold out for this, comfortable position in the philanthropy, probably justifying to myself like, well, but I can still do some good here. And I think in this moment, when we're facing what we're facing in this country, folks need to push, they need to battle, and they need to be smart about when they're doing it, for whom they're doing it, and how they're doing it. And so I say use your voice, and don't let people, let you not use your voice, to the question that I thought Christelle answered.
That's a fabulous way to end this panel. We shouldn't be pressured to be nice. I was always pressured to be nice and to be sweet and to just like take a seat. And we won't take the seat without talking. I said it this morning, it's basta ya. I said it at our conference last year. We will be unapologetic. Our community, as Latinos, we tend to say, we're very fatalistic and whatever will be, but the time has come. The power is ours and the voice is ours, and it's ours to use. So with that, I want to provide a round of applause for our fabulous panelists. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we're going to move over to the Tiburon Tank. Tiburon Tank is our Shark Tank, Latino style. Please join us there, because we have to lift up our families, our nonprofits, our businesses, all of this together. And we need to make sure that philanthropy and all of us as givers are there. So thank you, and we'll see you in the next room. Take care.